As the Soviet Union collapsed and a new Russia emerged, there was hope. Hope for democracy, human rights, and a liberal society. But that hope shattered quickly. And by the way, long before Vladimir Putin ever set foot inside the Kremlin. Because from its very birth, Russia's new democracy was deeply compromised. While there are many reasons why the country drifted so rapidly back towards authoritarianism, one of them lies within the structural weakness of its constitution and the political institutions that it created. A weakness that was just waiting for someone with the will to exploit it. This is the anatomy of a flawed political design and the story of the Constitution of Russia. Before the Soviet Empire fell apart, the gears of reform were already turning. It is not well known, but every Soviet republic actually had its own constitution. For decades, these documents were meaningless paperwork, completely eclipsed by the total control of the Communist Party. But when the system began to fracture, these legal frameworks suddenly became relevant. The Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic was governed by its constitution from 1978. During the era of glasnost and perestroika, that old document became a battlefield for democratic reform. From 1989, emergency rewrites allowed the first opposition parties to form and create a brand new presidential office. On June 12, 1991, Boris Yeltsin won that seat. By the end of the same year, the Soviet Union was formally dissolved, and the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic turned into the independent Russian Federation. It would have been the perfect moment to give the country a new constitution. Instead, it was decided to keep the old Soviet framework alive, patching it with over 300 frantic amendments to fit the new reality. But the result was a political Frankenstein. One commentator summarized the chaos perfectly. "We have turned our constitution into the diary of a madman. All the articles contradict each other. No person can live under such a state." The amendments established a powerful presidency, but left the parliament, still called the Congress of People's Deputies, with supreme authority. No functional mechanism existed to resolve conflicts between state organs. The resulting gridlock froze the country, triggering a fierce battle for supremacy. Yeltsin demanded radical economic shock therapy and a stronger presidency, arguing fiercely that the old constitution had to be replaced. Parliament resisted, accusing him of overstepping his legal bounds. The crisis reached its peak in September 1993. Yeltsin dissolved parliament by decree, despite lacking the constitutional authority to do so. Parliament responded by impeaching him. The standoff culminated in armed clashes on the streets of Moscow. The Russian White House, where parliament had barricaded itself, was shelled by tanks before being seized by military forces loyal to the president. With his opponents imprisoned or sidelined, Yeltsin fast-tracked a referendum for a brand new constitution on December 12. Officially, it passed with 58% approval, a narrow margin that reflected a deeply fractured society. Furthermore, the turnout was recorded at just over 54%, barely clearing the 50% minimum required. Analysts and independent experts strongly suspected these numbers were rigged just to cross the finish line. In the end, Yeltsin got the constitution he wanted, but what kind of system had he actually built? On paper, the 1993 constitution resembles those of many democratic countries. It defines the country as a federal law-bound state with a republican form of government. The rights and freedoms of the individual and their observance and protection are declared the highest value. The text guarantees freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and political participation. It also formally establishes a separation of power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The question was whether the balance of power created was sufficient to prevent one branch from dominating the others. At the center of the system stands the president, who serves as the head of state and is directly elected by Russian citizens. As Yeltsin intended, the office was designed with extensive powers. The president sets the main directions of domestic and foreign policy, he holds the nuclear codes as commander-in-chief, possesses the authority to declare martial law, and he can issue binding decrees that carry the force of law. Inspired in part by the French constitutional model, Russia adopted a dual executive system. Alongside the president sits a cabinet led by a prime minister, officially titled the chairman of the government. The president nominates the chairman, who then proposes his ministers for presidential appointment. Together, they form the government of the Russian Federation. While the president nominates the prime minister, the state Duma, the lower house of the Russian parliament, must approve the appointment. If the Duma rejects the president's candidate 3 times, the president is constitutionally required to dissolve the parliament and call new elections. Once the government is formed, the Duma is responsible for overseeing and questioning its actions, holding the power to pass a vote of no confidence by a majority. Crucially, however, the president retains the power to dismiss the prime minister at its own discretion, leaving the government ultimately answerable to both the president and the parliament. Reviving the name Duma for the legislative chamber carried massive historical significance. It was the name of the first national Russian parliament that emerged from the Russian Revolution of 1905. introduced by the Tsarist regime in response to widespread upheaval. It was abolished after the Soviets came to power in 1917. Now, Russia could build on this early parliamentary tradition. The State Duma consists of 450 deputies. Half of the seats are filled by directly elected candidates in single-member constituencies, while the other half are chosen through party lists. A party must win at least 5% of the vote to gain seats, a mechanism modeled after countries like Germany and Poland to ensure stable coalitions and prevent an overly fragmented parliament. All national legislation begins its journey in the State Duma. Once the Duma passes a bill by a majority vote, it must be approved by the second chamber, the Federation Council, which is the upper house in Russia. Together the two chambers form the bicameral Federal Assembly. The Federation Council represents each of the 89 federal subjects of Russia, which possess various administrative structures and different degrees of autonomy, and now includes the annexed territory of Crimea from 2014, as well as parts of Ukraine that were incorporated in 2022. Each region sends 2 senators, one from the regional executive and one from the regional legislature. The Federation Council therefore consists of 178 members, representing the regions. It can either approve a draft law passed by the Duma or veto it. If a veto is issued, the two chambers are required to form a conciliatory commission to produce a compromise bill, on which both houses vote again. The Duma, however, holds the upper hand in the legislative process. It can overturn a council veto with a 2/3 majority of its members. Afterwards, the legislation is sent to the president. He may either sign the bill into law or veto it within 14 days. Presidential vetoes are difficult to overcome. To override one, both parliamentary chambers must approve the legislation again by a 2/3 majority. In most circumstances, the president therefore possesses the final word in the legislative process. The judicial counterweight to the executive and legislative is the Constitutional Court, empowered to rule if laws or presidential decrees violate the Constitution. Any state organ may request such a review. The court currently consists of 11 judges. These judges are nominated by the president and appointed by the Federation Council for an indefinite term. The 170 judges of the Supreme Court, the highest judicial authority for civil and criminal matters, are appointed in the exact same manner. At first glance, the 1993 framework looks like a conventional democracy. In reality, the Russian president sits almost unconstrained, towering over the entire state. Russia appears structurally to be a semi-presidential system, which means power and responsibilities are divided between the president and the prime minister. The constitution says that the prime minister determines the main directions of government activity, but his responsibility is never clearly separated from the president's general power to direct domestic and foreign policy. The president ultimately prevails, as he has the power to dismiss the prime minister at his sole discretion. Unlike in the French semi-presidential system, where a president must navigate independent parliament and prime minister, the Russian system demands the prime minister's outright submission. The president is also able to protect his preferred government fairly well. While the Duma can pass a vote of no confidence against the prime minister, the president can simply ignore it the first time it happens. Only if the Duma repeats a no confidence vote within 3 months is the president forced to act, and even then he has a choice. He can either dismiss the government or dissolve parliament and call new elections. Facing the loss of their own seats, lawmakers choose survival over defiance. Furthermore, parliament cannot simply elect a new prime minister from its own ranks, as it would be common in parliamentary systems. The initiative comes always from the president. The State Duma's ability to control the government is therefore severely limited. And while the Federation Council does have the formal power to appoint judges to the highest courts, the president's exclusive right to nomination gives him a powerful tool to select candidates who are friendly to his policies. One might assume that this extreme concentration of power in the hands of the president only arrived when Vladimir Putin came to power. That is not the case. This is exactly the system that was created in 1993, engineered by Boris Yeltsin. The constitution itself even tasked the president with ensuring the coordinated functioning and cooperation of the organs of state power. That single clause helps explain the emergence of what scholars call super-presidentialism. Rather than playing a role within the executive branch, the president functions as a fourth branch above all other branches of state power. While Putin did not create the system, the way it was designed left the door wide open for power to be extended even further. After the turbulent 1990s, marked by economic collapse, hyperinflation, and rampant organized crime, the Russian public was exhausted and desperate for stability, and Vladimir Putin projected the image of a man who could deliver exactly that. His popularity soared, fueled by his brutal and decisive military campaign against Chechen rebels, his crusade against the ultra-wealthy class of oligarchs, and the broad economic upswing financed by skyrocketing oil and gas prices. He also consolidated power by increasing control over the media. By the mid-2000s, the Kremlin had re-established near-total dominance over the major national television networks. All of this initially without any major constitutional changes. Whenever the law stood in the way of his goals, Putin used highly legalistic maneuvers to alter or bypass it rather than outright breaking it, maintaining a veneer of institutional legitimacy. Following the Beslan hostage crisis, a devastating Chechen terrorist attack, Putin used the political momentum to seize control over the federative regions and strip them of their autonomy. From then on, regional governors were no longer democratically elected, but were instead nominated directly by the president. His sustained popularity also ensured that the pro-Kremlin party United Russia secured a two-thirds supermajority in the Duma in 2007, while simultaneously dominating regional governorships and municipalities. With this absolute legislative control, the Kremlin could finally execute more overt structural changes. The era of binding the rules was over, the era of changing them had begun. By 2008, Vladimir Putin faced a hard legal boundary. The constitution explicitly prohibited anyone from serving more than 2 consecutive presidential terms. Rather than tearing up the text and triggering an international backlash, the Kremlin executed a flawless political bait and switch. Putin stepped down, backed a loyal understudy named Dmitry Medvedev for the presidency, and immediately took the job of prime minister. On paper, Medvedev was now the supreme commander-in-chief. In reality, everyone knew who was still pulling the strings. Just months into his term, Medvedev used his executive power to initiate the first major structural changes to the 1993 constitution. He proposed extending the parliamentary term from 4 to 5 years and the presidential term from 4 to 6 years. The Kremlin's public justification sounded perfectly reasonable. Longer terms would ensure stability, guarantee the smooth rollout of long-term state economic projects, and shield the country from the chaotic disruptions of constant election cycles. But the real objective became clear in 2012. Because the original 1993 text only banned consecutive terms, Putin's 4-year break as prime minister completely reset his legal clock. He ran for the presidency again, won, and stepped right into the newly expanded 6-year mandates. By leveraging the single loophole, Putin secured the throne for 2012 and again in 2018. Finally, in 2020, President Putin proposed a far-reaching constitutional reform that would rewrite no less than 1/3 of the 1993 text. Although it was legally unnecessary, the Kremlin chose to seek public approval through a tightly controlled nationwide vote on July 1, 2020. The official results reported that 78.5% of voters backed the massive overhaul, which fundamentally restructured the distribution of power, the supremacy of Russian law over international treaties, and the official identity of the state. The true force behind the entire overhaul was the looming 2024 problem. Under the original constitution, Putin's second consecutive 6-year term was due to expire, legally barring him from seeking re-election. Buried inside the massive package of amendments was a specific clause that reset his previous terms to 0. This nullification granted him the right to run for 2 additional terms, potentially enabling him to remain in power until 2036. Among the most consequential institutional changes was a direct blow to judicial independence. Previously, while court judges were nominated by the president, the Constitutional Court retained the right to internally elect its own chairman and deputy chairman. Now the president explicitly holds the power to nominate these top leadership positions directly. Also, High Court judges could previously be removed only through complex disciplinary procedures anchored entirely within the judiciary itself. The 2020 amendments shattered this autonomy, empowering the Federation Council to dismiss judges of the Constitutional and Supreme Courts acting on a direct proposal from the president. By seizing the right to initiate the removal of High Court judges, the executive effectively dismantled the last institutional barrier to its total dominance. To secure his grip on the legislature, the president was also granted the power to directly appoint 30 additional senators to the Federation Council, 7 of whom can be appointed for life. Although the Russian president has always held significantly more power than executives in other political systems, the 2020 reforms have rendered his position virtually untouchable. Checks on his power are scarce, and in practice, barely applicable. It remains technically possible to impeach the president. However, the threshold for doing so is extraordinarily high, and it can be initiated solely on the grounds of high treason or other grave crimes. On the surface, Russia maintains all the outward scenery of a constitutional democracy. Elections are held, courts assemble, parliament debates. But this performance hides a deeper fundamental truth. Paper rights and nominal separation of powers mean absolutely nothing when the architecture of a constitution is deliberately off balance. A document engineered to suit a strongman will eventually be used to create an even greater one. History often portrays a clean break between these two men, painting Yeltsin as the champion of the democracy and Putin as the tyrant who destroyed it. But that narrative is a myth. Yeltsin himself constructed the hyper-presidential system to defeat his own political rivals. When Putin assumed power, he didn't need to launch a bloody coup or tear up the 1993 constitution. For his first decades in power, he didn't change a single line. He didn't have to. He simply perfected the immense executive weapons his predecessor had already codified. Slowly but steady, the legislature became a rubber stamp. The judiciary transformed into an arm of state security. Autocratic legalism became the ultimate tool to crush dissent, silence the press, and strip the regions of their voice. Whether a different piece of paper could have saved Russian democracy is an open question. No system can survive if the public will to defend it dissolves, but the 1993 constitution made the autocrats' path exceptionally easy. It was never built as a defensive democracy. It lacked the internal immune system to resist an authoritarian infection. As it stands now, the whole system inherently favors a strong absolute leader. And this will not change even when Putin is gone. If Russia's political system is ever to change again, it will need a completely new constitution. And to achieve that, it will need nothing less than a complete transformation of its political culture. Or something even more radical, a revolution. But what do you think? What happens to Russia after Putin is gone? Will the next leader actually change the system, or will things stay exactly the same? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you soon.